Hello everyone, welcome to Team Slytherin's Module 1 final project, Agile Methodologies. Today we are going to be covering the methodology of Kanban. So how was Kanban created? Kanban is actually a combination of the two Japanese words for visual and sign. It was created by a Toyota engineer from Japan named Taichi Ono in the 1940s. While working at Toyota, Ono noticed a way to improve production rather than creating products to fulfill anticipated demand. He thought that they could produce products based on current demand. And so the Kanban methodology was born out of that recognized opportunity to pull supply rather than pushing it. It works similar to a supermarket. They stock the shelves just enough to fit the demand. This way, inventory can be lower and it reduces costs. At Toyota, they applied this system to the production plan. Production teams had a Kanban card that would be passed down the line to signal which materials were needed for the team requesting them. So it actually worked kind of backwards. The order for Toyota's production was supplier to warehouse to production line. The production line would send their Kanban to the warehouse, and as the warehouse fulfilled the order, they would also send a Kanban to the supplier. This became what we now know as just-in-time manufacturing. Nowadays, this JIT process can be applied to software and product development, and that is when it was made into the Kanban board style that we are familiar with and see today. Using Kanban boards, teams can optimize their workflow and see what needs to be done at each step. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in our next slide, which is how does Kanban work? So using Kanban, like I said, teams can optimize their workflow. They can see what needs to be done at each step. Kanban boards can be physical or digital and are a great way to visualize work progress and create a flow between steps. Generally, Kanban boards are separated into 3 stages: to do, in progress, and done. Software teams, however, often have a 4-step of review that comes in after the in-progress stage and before the done stage. Tasks are represented visually as cards, and each of these cards contains information about the task, who is responsible for it, and other relevant attributes such as priority or estimated time. These cards then pass through the stages as work is done on them. Something starts in a to-do category. Someone actually starts working on it. It's moved to in progress. A lot of times there might be subtasks even in these cards, like on popular softwares like Asana or even Notion that I'm sure some of you are familiar with. And so as it's being worked on, they're moved to the done category. There's also typically a backlog of tasks where the to-dos are pulled into this flow from. You might have all the tasks that need to get done for a week and then pull those each day into the to-do when you're actually ready to start working on them. And so that is kind of the flow of Kanban. Kanban is also typically used to kind of manage workers' capacity, and so this process allows, there's typically a lot of times a work in progress limit. A lot of times teams will only allow employees to have a certain amount of tasks in progress because this tool is all about maximizing capacity and making sure that the team can actually finish the things that they're starting. So what are some advantages and disadvantages? In the advantages column, we can see that Kanban has flexibility. Since the Kanban teams only focus on their part of the process, the work they need to do can be reprioritized without disrupting the current work of the entire team. Second, continuous delivery. This means that Kanban teams can continuously deliver products to the market, and it can turn continuously to improve future iterations without delays. Less waste. An important part of Kanban is keeping the work in progress to a minimum, like we just talked about, so there's less multitasking. With limited work, teams can also identify what is unnecessary and discard it without having to waste time starting on it and discarding it later. And so what are some of the disadvantages here? There's a lack of structure. The flexibility of Kanban can also be a disadvantage sometimes. Without specific roles, some teams may become disorganized or confused. And then there's also less focus on planning. With a just-in-time emphasis, planning is less detailed. Complex projects can be difficult to manage and can lead to unorganized efforts. And then finally, management issues. Kanban requires teams to regulate themselves, so imbalances in effort or skill can lead to failures. There's a lot of autonomy in Kanban. You are responsible for your tasks, kind of knowing what your capacity is and what it takes for you to be able to finish your tasks. And so that is kind of where management issues and not having one person necessarily in charge of everything can be a difficult thing to manage. All right, let's talk about some industries that use Kanban. Where do we see this actually happening? So the first primary one is manufacturing. And so they use Kanban to limit the buildup of excess inventory. think of this as the works in progress category at any point on the production line. Kanban in manufacturing also really limits bottlenecks by promoting communication and information sharing between individuals and departments. Kanban is great because you can really see as tasks stack up in a certain column, you can see where your bottleneck is happening, and it really helps teams to identify where their processes are not working well. And so in manufacturing, it also leads to reduced expenses, greater customer satisfaction, more efficient processes, and minimized risk due to unforeseen problems, because Kanban is a subset of Agile and is able to flex and change and shift with unexpected things that come up. And so they use this holistically to track production and order new shipments. For software, the kind of bird's eye view is that it allows software development teams to visualize and optimize a team's workflow. And so specifically, there are software uses to high delivery due to focusing on finishing tasks before starting new ones. And so with software, shipping the product is really important. Actually being able to start your task and finish it through to completion is really important. And so Kanban really helps software teams do this before and really finish a feature before they start on a new one, because software is always changing, always being updated. And so this really helps teams stay on track. There are also flexible planning options, faster output, and clearer focus. Again, that flexibility just ends up being so important here. Kanban for software teams offers real-time communication of capacity and transparency throughout the development cycle. Some of you are probably pretty familiar with software development. You know that there's constantly a lot of different skilled people working on a lot of different things, and so it allows people to see what is being worked on by who throughout the entire process. And so what are some actual companies that we see using this? So Spotify, actually to keep up with some of their larger projects, has utilized Kanban to split their big projects into smaller projects that can then be better managed. They saw that they were struggling to keep up with some of their larger projects, and so that's why they started using Kanban. And so they do this by separating tasks into those classic categories of to-do, doing, and done. They categorize tasks as tangible or intangible. That would be like an attribute that they would probably attach on one of those task cards. And then finally, they also identify if tasks are small, which is equivalent to a day's work, medium, equivalent to a few days' work, or large, a week's worth of work. Anything longer than a week is going to be split down into smaller tasks that they can be requalified then as that subtask, a small, medium, or large. Using this has allowed Spotify to have less lead time, which is lead time is just the time in between each of these stages. It has allowed them to get through these stages with things that they are rolling out faster, and their output is actually higher. And so Kanban has been very successful for Spotify, especially because it is such a large company and they do a lot of meta level things. And so this has allowed them to actually see those things be realized rather than them kind of getting lost in the imaginary universes of workers' headspace. And so let's talk about how Kanban differs from other methodologies that we've covered. So the kind of three that Kanban is often compared against is Waterfall, Agile, and Scrum. And so in Waterfall, the main difference is that Kanban is not as sequentially rigid. In the Waterfall method, all tasks in a certain step, all tasks need to be completed to move on to the next step of the process. So if you had a certain amount of tasks in a to-do category, before you could move on to the in progress or done category, you would have to finish all of the tasks in that to-do category to then start them into the next process, which is a little bit different than Kanban. You could have a few things in Kanban and move one of them over and get it all the way to done while one is still in the to-do category. They can move independently of each other, whether or not each task has reached the same stage. Whereas Waterfall, they are going to have to all be done, consider that stage done, and then start a new stage. And the stages in Waterfall are also a little bit different. They're not to do, in progress, and done. They have a different subset. And then Kanban versus Agile. Kanban is a subset of Agile, so they are very similar. But the main difference is that Kanban is more of a tool for visualization than a complete holistic framework. And again, that's because Kanban is a subset of Agile. But where Agile is a true framework and holistic process, Kanban is more of a tool and visualization aid to see this process happening rather than the process itself. And then Scrum Kanban versus Scrum. Scrum is about getting more work done more quickly, whereas Kanban really focuses on improving the process of the work. That process is determined by worker capacity more than fixed timeline. And so Scrum helps teams collaborate and get high impact work done, whereas Kanban helps teams balance the work they need to do based on the available capacity of each of a team's members. Okay, so we've talked about differences, but how can Kanban be used with other methodologies? So before we talk about Scrumban, let's talk about that waterfall and agile. So with waterfall, Kanban does not work super well, just they are very fundamentally different. But Kanban can be, at least like that kind of visualization process, can be adapted to visualize the completion of each kind of stage in a waterfall process. It can help people using a waterfall process track all the tasks to get to a completion stage, and kind of give them a view of all the subtasks that were involved in each stage as a holistic process. And then with Agile, again, it complements really well because it's a subset of Agile, and so it just works as a great visualization tool for flexible project management. So let's talk about Scrumban now. So Scrumban, as I'm sure you can tell, is the combination of Scrum methodology and Kanban methodology. It's one of the most popular blends of project management methodologies and is commonly referred to, as you see here, Scrumban. And so what happens here is that we take the Kanban features of that clear backlog of tasks, knowing what needs to be done, a hard limit on the amount of tasks in progress, setting a cap so that you are matching worker capacity, and then that visual representation of tasks as cards that move through stages. Those Kanban features are then added to these Scrum features that include a process iteration after sprints, working on work for a sprint period, and then kind of looking at the process and figuring out how it can be changed and updated, and then work prioritized by complexity so that you know what takes longest and can complete it well. And then finally, that Scrum feature of clear definition of what it means for a task to be considered done so that everyone is on the same page about what is complete and when. And so you combine those features, and that's kind of where you get this Scrumban blend, kind of combining the best of both worlds. And so unique to Scrumban is the fact that there is no team hierarchy, and there doesn't necessarily need to be a deadline. And so a lot of the time when a team uses Scrum, even if they're not using a combination as full as Scrumban, they will do so on a Kanban board to visualize their progress in Scrum. And so that is kind of everything about Kanban. So let's practice. What does this look like to do? So we have a little activity for you guys, as you can see modeled here. It's going to work really well as one person in groups of three. Groups of three ideal. If you can meet in person is great, but if you're on Zoom like we are probably right now, then you can also do this on Zoom and just kind of like hold your things up to the camera, and that's going to work okay too. And so the first step, go ahead and assign a group member to each of the first three stages, someone to do, someone to in progress, and someone to review. And then you're going to start this activity. And so the first person, to do people, you're going to go ahead and draw a shape. It can be any shape you want, square, circle, triangle, hexagon, whatever you want. We don't care. And then after you draw your shape, you're going to go ahead and take that and pass it to the next stage. And so that's going to be your in progress stage. So in progress people, go ahead and add something to that shape that makes an object. So you see here, like that circle has now become a face. And then once you've done that, you're going to pass it to your next stage, which is going to be the review. And now review people, you're going to edit that creation and add finishing touches before finally approving it and passing it to the done stage. So each person is going to pass their work, their completed work, to the next person. Bigger groups can have more people in the in progress stage, as that's probably going to take the most time to visualize this. And this image is just an example of what the shapes might look like at each step. So hopefully that is helpful to you as you guys are moving through this activity.